Yo, Rosalie,
Hello.
let's start this meeting.
Okay, can we also check, I just wanted to check if Andy Zellinger on EPA is correct only because he wasn't on Karen's list, but if someone can just confirm.
Yes.
He's with EPA. He probably won't be speaking.
Okay, great. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
I will definitely.
Aloha and welcome to the 12th meeting of the CRI. My name is Marty Townsend and we're coming to you live and direct from Āina Haina Public Library. Here to talk about the Community Representation Initiative for Red Hill. We'll start with our Oli.
Everyone should know it by now. So it's Oli written by Kumukoe Kapu Kalani Hewitt, and it just helps us to center our focus on why we're here, which is for the vai, which is for the water. Okay, we're gonna do it 3 times. Ola I ka ha, ola I ka vai, ola I ka I, Hawaii. Hawaii, Hawaii, ola I ka ha, ola I ka vai, ola I ka I, Hawaii, Hawaii, Hawaii. Ola I ka ha, ola I ka vai, ola I ka I, Hawaii, Hawaii, Hawaii. Mama ua noa, mahalo.
All right, so we'll start this meeting first with some introductions because we have several new CRI members joining us, and then we'll get into the business of it. So let's just start down the line and we'll just go all the way down, reintroduce everybody. Take it away, Melody.
Oh, okay. Aloha. Thank you very much. My name is Melody Aduha. I am a CRI member representing an organization which is the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party.
Aloha, my name is Mia Lisa Otis. I am a protector of vai and Āina. I'm also on the advisory board of Pu'uhonua o Wailupe, and I stand here to protect the vai. Mahalo.
Aloha, my name is Marty Townsend. I am an at-large member of the CRI. I'm an environmental attorney by training, and I live in Kalihi.
Hello, my name is Tara Sutton, and I am on the CRI as representing the affected family members, and I am co-chair as of tonight with Shannon.
I'm Shannon Benz, also prior Red Hill Fuel Facility around 2020 through 21-22 timeframe. Newly elected to the CRI as a member at large, and also co-chair. Happy to be here.
Good evening. I'm Walter Chun. I'm substituting for one of the CRI representatives, Ilima de Costa.
Aloha, I'm Natalia Hussey-Burdick, a newly elected member of the CRI representing a community organization, the Sierra Club. Thank you.
Aloha, I'm Helani Sonora Pale. I am the Native Hawaiian representative for the CRI. Mahalo.
Aloha, Ernie Lau, Honolulu Board of Water Supply. Aloha, everybody.
Hello, my name's Erwin Kawata. I'm at the Honolulu Board of Water Supply.
And then online we have Mandy and Tara.
Aloha. Aloha, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mandy, and then Tara after.
Sure. Aloha. My name is Mandy Feint. I am a
prior Ford Island resident and an impacted family. I serve on the CRI to represent those impacted families, particularly those of us who have moved off island. I will not be turning on my video tonight. I'm about 1 week post-back surgery. So I am listening in from Virginia tonight. Thank you all. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Mandy. Tara?
Aloha, Tara Rojas. I'm here on Oahu, and I am here by request to serve on the panel. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. So in this meeting, we're going to spend a significant amount of time going into the lead question, and I appreciate that there are several members of EPA staff who are here online to help with that presentation. But before, and then we'll go into addressing other issues, especially from the Board of Water Supply, given all of the revelations that have come out about the spreading plume of contamination in the AL well. But before we get to that, I am very pleased to pass the mic to our new leadership. So Tara Sutton and Shannon Bentz are the new chairs for the CRI. Everyone be very, very nice to them, or I'll be mean to you.
Okay, well, good evening. I almost said good morning. That's how tired I am. Let's go ahead and let the EPA people get started, but could you guys introduce yourself and your team first, and then go on to your presentation?
Okay, I'll just start off by introducing myself. This is Amy Miller. I'm the director of the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division, and we have some folks from our drinking water office here to talk about lead based on last month's conversation around lead sampling. So I'm going to pass it on to Luis.
Hi, everybody. My name is Luis Garcia Bacarich, and I am manager of the Drinking Water Office in EPA Region 9 in San Francisco. I'm going to be leading or presenting in a few moments on the lead and copper rule. I'll be doing so with my colleague Claudia Espinoza. And maybe, Claudia, you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Claudia Espinoza. I think many of you already know me. I am the drinking water lead for Red Hill, and I will be co-presenting tonight as well for lead.
Luis, are there individuals from Department of Health that will be joining you in the presentation? Should they introduce themselves as well?
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to get the participant list up and see who might be on from DOH.
I think Jeffrey's online, I see. Jeffrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Tsai. I am actually with EPA Region 9, but right now on detail to Hawaii Department of Health to help them on the pharmacy as well as the Red Hill issue. And we also have another speaker. I don't believe she has joined yet, but she will be joining shortly.
Joan Corrigan is not admitted as a panelist. If you could please put her on as a panelist. Thank you. Sorry, and I'm Joanna Sito with the Department of Health Environmental Management Division.
And we'll introduce the rest of the EPA folks later if topics come up that they need to talk about. I just wanted to have the drinking water folks introduce themselves.
And so then shall we jump into our drinking water presentation? Okay, very good. And Claudia, are you going to be able to share this evening? Would you like me to?
I should be able to. Give me 1 second to see if I can share my screen.
All right, thanks.
Yes, you should be able to. Just let me know if there are any issues.
Okay. Okay, so let me go here into presenter. I feel like I want to switch the screens though. It's showing it on my big screen.
I think if you hit display settings, right next to that, I think you should be able to.
Yeah, because of Zoom, it's like hidden right underneath the Zoom controls. So I'm trying to figure out how I can navigate it without signing off of Zoom. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, here we go. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
You move it around. Okay, perfect. Well, hello, thank you for having us this evening. As Amy mentioned, we've had a lot of questions over the past several months, really, and most recently in the last several weeks about lead. So we wanted to take this time to have a deep dive on lead to not only just address all the questions, but also to provide information on the lead in drinking water regulations, as well as how we are addressing lead in the special investigation at the Joint Base Pearl Harbor and Army water systems. And then also provide a general overview of some of the lead initiatives that we are doing here in the state of Hawaii, but also at a national level. So with that, we have a very packed agenda tonight. So I'm going to try to keep it moving so that we have enough time. First, my colleague Luis is going to be providing an overview of the lead and copper rule. Then Hawaii Department of Health will be providing their review of the Joint Base Pearl Harbor system's compliance with the lead and copper rule. And then I'm going to be talking about specifically lead testing under the long-term monitoring and extended drinking water monitoring plans. And then both EPA and DOH will talk about the lead initiatives that are being done on a holistic level to reduce exposure of lead in drinking water. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. Now I will hand it over to Luis to go over the lead and copper rule.
All right, thank you very much. Again, my name is Luis Garcia-Backrich with the EPA Region 9 Drinking Water Office. And if we go to the first slide, please. The main issue that the lead and copper rule seeks to address is dissolved lead. As many of you are probably aware, lead comes from plumbing materials, very rarely from the source. The most hazardous of the plumbing materials is lead pipe, which are a minimum of 99.7% pure lead. Then there's lead-based solder and brass with high lead content on the surface that water is exposed to. EPA has been working to address lead in drinking water for many decades and banned lead nationally in 1988. We have continued to further restrict the amount of lead in plumbing materials since then. When water is even slightly corrosive, lead can begin to dissolve quite quickly, and it concentrates for as long as that water stagnates. The stagnation is important to keep in mind when you think about various aspects of the water distribution system, both the utility-owned distribution mains and service lines, and privately owned premise plumbing within a home or a building. Water and distribution mains seldom stagnate for long because usually somebody is always using water, either flushing a toilet, washing their hands, watering their lawn or a garden. However, water stagnation occurs with much greater frequency and duration at homes and buildings. When no water is being used in the home, water stagnates all the way out to the point where the service line connects to the main in the street. When any water is being used in the building, water will flow through the service line to the specific tap that is being used. So from the perspective of water stagnation within the building, the most significant amounts of stagnation is at the individual tap. So please also keep in mind that each building and home has their own unique schedule and water use patterns. So this is part of the challenge that EPA has faced when developing a national primary drinking water regulation that protects public health from a potent toxin such as lead. Next slide, please. I want to start a bit high level about drinking water regulations before delving into the specifics of the lead and copper rule. The lead and copper rule is one of the national primary drinking water regulations that were written by EPA as required by the Safe Drinking Water Act that Congress passed. National primary drinking water regulations are covered in Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations in Part 141. But I want to draw your attention to this provision of coverage that makes clear that national primary drinking water regulations apply to public water systems and the infrastructure that they control. There is no provision within the national primary drinking water regulations that apply to property owners, landlords, property management companies, anything like that. Next slide, please. Through the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation, EPA protects public health from contaminants by establishing maximum contaminant level goals, which are unenforceable levels at which no known or anticipated adverse health effect would occur, and it allows for an additional margin of safety. Then we have maximum contaminant levels, which is the maximum permissible amount of a contaminant in water that is delivered to any user within the public water system. And then finally, there are treatment techniques, which are required processes that are intended to reduce the level of a contaminant in a drinking water to protect public health in lieu of an MCL. Next slide, please. When Congress wrote the Safe Drinking Water Act, they acknowledged that certain goals are unattainable. So they incorporated latitude for EPA to consider feasibility when establishing these national standards. And with respect to treatment techniques, the Safe Drinking Water Act states that if in the judgment of the administrator, it's not economically or technologically feasible to establish an MCL for a contaminant, a treatment technique that leads to the reduction in the level of such contaminant sufficient to protect public health must be adopted. So compliance with MCLs is determined within the portions of the distribution system that are owned and controlled by the water system. Most are at the point after treatment where the water enters the distribution system. The lead and copper rule is trying to reduce harm from a contaminant that originates from a point beyond the control of the public water system. So hopefully you can understand that an MCL was determined to be inappropriate for lead. However, EPA can require water systems to manage their water chemistry to reduce corrosion, so a treatment technique was established for lead. Next slide, please. There are actually 4 discrete treatment technique requirements under the lead and copper rule. The first one you see at the top, corrosion control treatment, applies to all community water systems, such as Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, and to non-transient, non-community systems, which are water systems that serve the same people regularly, but people don't actually live there. The other 3 are triggered when action levels are exceeded. I'm going to spend a bit of time in the next few, in a few slides from now, talking much more about how the action level is exceeded. But I want to take this opportunity right now to plant the seed that the action level within the context of the lead and copper rule is really only a measure of the effectiveness of corrosion control treatment. The action level is not a health-based level. I do think that the action level is really one of the most misunderstood parts of the lead and copper rule. So I am going to spend some additional time on that. Building on what I just said, that the action level is only a measure of the effectiveness of corrosion control treatment, the reason why the action level is critical for the other treatment techniques is because that those requirements are fallback measures if corrosion control treatment alone is not sufficient to reduce lead concentrations in water, in tap water samples. Before I get into how to determine if the action level has been exceeded, I'm going to use the next 2 slides to demonstrate how sampling results are used to measure the effectiveness of corrosion control treatment. Next slide, thank you. All right. I've been speaking about effective corrosion control treatment. In the lead and copper rule, the regulation uses the word optimized, but that really just means effective. Acknowledging that there are no known safe levels of lead in drinking water, you can see in the top box about optimal corrosion control treatment that the federal regulation actually defines what optimal or effective corrosion control treatment means. And that is treatment that minimizes lead concentrations. Please note that it does not say eliminates. The 2 lower boxes that I posted here on the site cover initial determinations of the effectiveness of corrosion control treatment, and they're based on 90th percentile results from tap water samples. For small and medium-sized water systems, these are water systems that serve less than 50,000 people, they only need to meet the action level. Large water systems have a higher bar. Large water systems need to have their 90th percentile results below the practical quantitation level, or the PQL. So what's the PQL? Let's get into that in the next slide, please. Working off the previous slide, we see here that EPA's gold standard for optimized or most effective corrosion control treatment is a system with 90th percentile results below 5 parts per billion. So just please see the note there that 0.005 milligrams per liter is essentially the same as 5 parts per billion. Apologize if I hadn't covered units before. But keep this in mind when Department of Health talks about lead and copper rule compliance in a minute. This 5 part per billion number is quite significant. If you've been able to follow kind of all of my regulatory gobbledygook, you might be wondering about what about like large water systems that are above 5 but below 15. The short answer is that they need to follow a set of steps established in the lead and copper rule to install additional treatment. If you'd like to learn more about that, I do offer a half-day training that I present to water utilities and other regulators. I've been promising to get into more details about the 90th percentiles, and so let's jump into that right now. Next slide, please. As previously noted, federal standards take feasibility into consideration when establishing requirements for public water systems. EPA acknowledges variability of water stagnation from location to location that can impact lead concentrations in tap water. So when establishing the treatment technique trigger for the lead and copper rule, and as I demonstrated in the previous 2 slides, EPA determined that a well-run public water system should be able to achieve lead concentrations of 15 parts per billion or less in 90% of their samples. This also means that EPA acknowledges that up to 10% of the samples can be greater than 15 parts per billion. And I would also like to note that EPA did not establish any sort of upper limit for detectable lead. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to demonstrate really quickly how 90th percentiles can be determined, so you understand what an action level exceedance looks like. Next slide, please. So we're talking about how 10% of the samples can be greater than 15 parts per billion. If we have 10 samples, for example, then we see that you can have one really high sample. In this case, that's 10,000 parts per billion. That is astronomically high. The second highest, which is sample number 9, which would be the 90th percentile result, is 15.4 parts per billion. Because of significant figures, 15.4 would actually round down to 15. And so this would actually not be an action level exceedance. And I'd like to draw your attention that all the rest of those results are right at 15 parts per billion. This is not an action level exceedance, even though we have lots of detectable lead. Let's take this a step further in the next slide. So let's say a utility has been collecting 100 samples, right? 10% of 100 is 10. So we're going to take our 10 highest samples that you see here, and they are all really screaming high. And we're going to put them aside, and we're going to take a look at sample number 90. And this is, again, the 90th percentile result, and is, as I explained on the previous slide, 15.4 rounds down. Let's take this one step even further. Now, let's say you had a sample pool of approximately 8,000 samples. The 90th percentile result from that sample pool would be sample number 7,200. So even if you had 100 sample results over 15 parts per billion, that would still be less than 2% of the samples, which is nowhere near the 10% threshold needed in establishing the lead and copper rule. Next slide, please. As many of you are very well aware, the lead and copper rule is highly prescriptive in how the samples are collected. It describes the specific locations where the samples need to be collected, and it describes the method in which the samples need to be collected. That method is a 1-liter sample that is a first draw collected from a kitchen or a bathroom sink on the cold water side after that water has been stagnating for a minimum of 6 hours. So essentially no, usage of any water usage in the home. Next slide, and this is my final slide for my lead and copper rule overview. As I've mentioned several times throughout these past number of slides, the lead action level is not a health-based level. Sampling in accordance with the process that I just talked about is only to determine the effectiveness of corrosion control treatment throughout the system and to determine if other protections are necessary. I would like to add that the lead and copper rule requires that when tap samples are collected under the lead and copper rule, the lead results need to be made available to the people that consume water from the tap that was sampled. In my many years of reviewing lead and copper analytical results, I've never found a false positive lead result. From my perspective, every lead result is real and should be taken seriously. While the lead and copper rule may not feel entirely satisfactory with respect to the level of protection that lead demands, I hope that this presentation has provided an understanding of what triggers regulatory action for a drinking water utility under the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations. And with that, I will turn it over to the next presenter.
I think the sound is working.
Who's the next speaker? Sorry.
It's Department of Health, but they actually recorded their slides, so it should be playing automatically. I'm trying to see if there's something I need to do in order for it to play.
Claudia, there's a share audio button that's like in the same thing as the share screen button. So like stop sharing. Yeah, you have to stop sharing and start again. We think.
Let's see if this works now. I did reshare the sound.
Environmental engineer. I am with EPA Region 9 for over 9 years and is currently on detail to Hawaii.
Can you make it a little louder, please?
Now we have covered basic.
Yeah, make that go all the way. Yeah. Thank you.
Claudia, are you ready to start again?
I actually cannot hear it on my end, so I don't know when to turn the slides, but were you able to hear the recording?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move it to the next slide if someone can just let me know next slide.
Okay. Did he stop speaking in the recording?
I am not able to tell because I can't hear it on my end.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
Now we have covered basic information of the lead and copper rule. We would like to show you the compliance history for both Navy and MMR systems since 2010. The blue table on the left is the data from the Navy system, whereas the green table on the right is the data from the Army system. The monitoring frequency can be different from systems to systems, but in general, they can be on a 6-month, annual, or triennial frequency. Let's focus on the blue table first. From 2010 to 2023, all 90th percentile are below 5 part per billion. As a reminder, the particle quantitation level is 5 part per billion. Since the 90th percentile is below the 5 part per billion, the system is deemed to have optimized corrosion control. If the 90th percentile is above 5 part per billion, the system will have been required to have corrosion control treatment. During each of their monitoring period, the system has been in compliance. After the Red Hill incident in 2021, DOH required the Navy to go back to 6 months monitoring due to the potential change of water quality after extensive flushing and switching to a sole source. After 2 rounds of samples with 90th percentile below 5 part per billion, which you can see in 2022, first round and second round, the system is now on annual monitoring period. In short, the compliance data indicate that the Navy system does not have corrosion issue. As for the AMR system, which is the green table on the right, has similar results. From 2011 to 2023, all 90th percentile are below 5 part per billion. Since the Army system is a medium-sized system, meaning the system is serving greater than 3,300 and less than or equal to 50,000 persons, the system is deemed to have optimized corrosion control if 90th percentile is below 15 part per billion. Similar to the Navy system, the AMR system had also switched to 6 months monitoring after the Red Hill incident. Right now, they are on annual monitoring this year. In summary, both Navy and Army system are in compliance to the lead and copper rule. Now I will hand the mic back to EPA.
Okay, I think it went automatically to the next slide. So looks like it was finished. So I want to thank DOH. Now we're going to go into lead testing in long-term monitoring and extended drinking water monitoring. Okay, so just to kind of go back, on November 29, 2021, Department of Health issued a public health advisory recommending the Navy water system consumers to avoid using water for drinking, cooking, or oral hygiene following a fuel release impacting the drinking water source for the Navy's Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam public water system and also the Army's Aliamanu Military Reserve public water system. For the Department of Health to amend this public health advisory, the Navy had to develop a sampling analysis plan with established evidentiary benchmarks for sampling, analysis, and remedial actions. The Department of Health amended this advisory over time and made the final amendment to the advisory to clear all 19 zones and manana housing on March 18, 2022, and declared all water in these zones safe to drink. The sampling analysis plan constructed a long-term approach to monitor the water system following the removal of the public health advisory. The Drinking Water Long-Term Monitoring Plan, or LTM, for the Joint Base Pearl Harbor and AMR water systems was developed by the Navy and Army to fulfill this post-drinking water advisory requirements of the sampling analysis plan and was approved by DOH and acknowledged by EPA on June 16, 2022. The long-term monitoring plan was intended as a surveillance tool to ensure the drinking water system was free of petroleum and response byproduct contamination over the course of 2 years. I want to emphasize that the monitoring completed under LTM was in addition to the regulatory drinking water monitoring that these water systems still needed to complete. So in long-term monitoring, the potential for elevated metal concentrations, including lead, were a concern due to changes and historical impacts to the source water, as well as secondary effects from system-wide flushing that were part of the emergency response activities. In the long-term monitoring plan, it established a lead screening level of 15 parts per billion. During the first phase of the long-term monitoring period, this is the first 3 months, lead samples were collected from residences, priority buildings, distribution systems, and the source water. Learnings from this first phase indicated that there wasn't high lead concentrations in the source water. So then for the remainder of long-term monitoring from months 4 to 24, lead samples were collected only from residences, priority buildings, and entry points to the distribution system. So during long-term monitoring, there was 8,579 samples collected to test for lead in 6,341 locations. Of these samples collected, 2,656 were non-detect, meaning that it was below the detection level of the analytical instrument. There were 5,897 detections of lead concentrations above the method detection limit. Of these detections, the great majority were below 5 parts per billion. As we discussed earlier in the lead and copper rule presentation, EPA's gold standard for optimized corrosion control treatment in a water system is 90th percentile results below 5 parts per billion. Though this is not regulatory sampling and following a different methodology, it puts into perspective that the lead detections that were seen in long-term monitoring were very low and a good indication that the water system's effectively minimizing lead exposures. During LTM, there were also 26 lead detections above the screening level, for which you can see a geospatial layout of these detections in the image to the right. The long-term monitoring plan outlined different courses of actions that the Navy needed to take in the event of a detection that was above the screening level of the specific analyte of interest. In the case of lead, if there was a detection above the screening level of 15 parts per billion at a house or building, the Navy would notify the Department of Health, EPA, and the house or building tenant. They would then resample to confirm the detection at the tap, where the detection was identified, as well as other taps in the resident or building as needed. Then the Navy would, again, as needed, replace the fixtures that were found to be contributing to the elevated lead levels. For those 26 detections we saw earlier, the Navy did replace the fixtures at all locations. The Navy would then resample to confirm the elevated lead concentrations that were addressed. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, public water systems do not have the jurisdiction inside private property and are not required to replace any premise plumbing, even if there was an elevated lead detection identified. The actions that the Navy has taken to address lead concentrations above the screening level is certainly above and beyond the expectations and requirements of other water systems throughout the country. So from LTM, there were approximately 65% of all residents that were sampled within the 20 zones. What we found was that there was no evidence suggesting that lead concentrations above the screening level were due to the November 2021 fuel release. Elevated lead concentrations above the screening level were at residents and building taps were mostly associated with premise plumbing. So now we're into EDWM, and the Extended Drinking Water Monitoring Plan, or EDWM, incorporates the lessons learned from long-term monitoring and focuses on JP5 and fuel-related analytes to identify the potential impacts to the drinking water systems and ensures appropriate corrective actions are taken. The Navy has committed to testing residences that were not tested during long-term monitoring, so this is about 35% of the remaining residences, plus Manana housing. By the end of extended drinking water monitoring, 100% of the residents served by the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and AMR public water systems would have been tested during LTM and EDWM. In EDWM, lead is being tested at the remaining residences and monthly at priority buildings, such as schools, childcare centers, and medical clinics. So far in EDWM, we have data available beginning from March 11th of this year through August 30th in the Navy's Safe Waters website. There's been a total of 2,224 samples for lead collected at 1,588 locations. Of these samples, 1,009 were non-detects, and there have been 1,215 detections. Again, we see a similar pattern from what we saw in LTM. A great majority, almost all of them, were below the 5 parts per billion, and only less than a handful actually were between 5 to 15 parts per billion. And there have been no detections above the screening level, which still remains at 15 parts per billion. Oops. Okay, before we get into that, again, we want to reemphasize that we're looking at 2 different things here. At first, we talked about the lead and copper rule, which is part of our national drinking water regulations. And then what we are doing here for long-term monitoring in EDWM is a special investigation. Samples collected for the purposes of a special investigation and not for standard drinking water monitoring compliance are not required to follow EPA's drinking water regulations, i.e. the lead and copper rule. The Navy's long-term monitoring and extended drinking water monitoring programs were developed to continue to investigate the potential impacts of the November 2021 JP5 fuel release at the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility to the Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM and AMR water systems, and therefore sampling protocols were established as appropriate for this investigation. For lead, the sampling protocols were established to evaluate potential impacts from the source water and the effects from system-wide flushing that were part of the emergency response activities. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over now to Department of Health, and this is again going to be another recording, so hopefully it moves on its own. And they're going to do a bit of a apples to oranges comparison. We know that these are 2 different initiatives, compliance sampling and then special investigation. But for the purposes of this discussion, we wanted to kind of show how they do compare to each other, looking at the values. So I'm going to move to the next slide.
As EPA mentioned, data from LTM and EDWM are non-compliant samples. Due to the difference in sampling procedure, the comparison is not really apple to apple. However, for the sake of comparison, here's a table showing data from the Navy system. From the earlier slide, we have already mentioned that the Navy system is in compliance to the lead and copper rule. From 2022 to 2023, all 98th percentile are below 5 parts per billion. This table shows more detail on the data. From 2022 to 2023, the Navy had conducted 3 rounds of lead and copper sampling. One of the sampling rounds has range of detection from less than 0.5 part per billion to 14.12 part per billion. This is the only detection during these 3 rounds period. There is no sites above action level. From the LTM and EDWM data, the range of detection is from less than 0.5 to 63.4 part per billion, with around 11% of sites with lead over 0.5 part per billion and 23 sites over the action level, which equate to about 0.26% of sites over the action level. There are 49 lead and copper rule sites, lead and copper monitoring sites overlap with LTM and EDWM sites. Please note that at least the address is the same. However, the actual faucet may be different because for LTM and EDWM, these sites typically the furthest point, such as second floor bathroom, whereas for lead and copper rule, those sites are typically taken from the kitchen sink.